What if I told you that a 42-year-old housekeeper with no education degree succeeded, where 23 professional nannies had failed? She transformed the most feared twins on the East Coast from absolute terrors into loving children. But the real twist: she had lost custody of her own son years before. Tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? And if this story already has you hooked, hit that subscribe button and leave a like, because what happens next will completely change how you see impossible transformations. March in Boston carried the lingering chill of winter, but inside the limestone walls of the Beacon Hill mansion, a different kind of storm was brewing. Shrill screams ricocheted through the corridors, bouncing off marble floors and antique furniture worth more than most people's annual salaries. In the grand foyer, a young woman in a crisp uniform clutched her designer handbag to her chest, mascara streaming down her face as she backed toward the massive oak door. "I quit. Not for all the money in Massachusetts would I spend another day with those monsters." The 23rd nanny in 18 months threw a crumpled resignation letter onto the imported Persian rug and fled into the misty morning, the heavy door slamming behind her with finality. In the most unexpected moments, destiny arrives disguised as disaster, knocking on doors we never thought to open. From the kitchen doorway, Cordelia Reynolds observed the scene with quiet resignation. At 42, her honey-brown hair now threaded with silver, she had witnessed this exact scenario 22 times before. Her calloused hands, marked by years of honest labor, gripped a dish towel as her employer, Bartholomew Winthrop III, ran agitated fingers through his salt and pepper hair. "Absolutely unacceptable," he muttered, pulling out his phone and pacing the marble floor in Italian leather shoes that clicked with each anxious step. "Jessica, it's Bartholomew. We need another nanny." "Yes, immediately." "No, I don't care about the agency's concerns regarding our reputation. Double the salary if necessary." Cordelia returned to the kitchen, where the morning sunlight filtered through French windows, illuminating floating dust motes in golden rays. As she wiped down the granite countertops, her mind wandered to the 3rd floor, where the infamous 8-year-old twins, Phineas and Rupert, were likely celebrating their latest victory. In 3 years of employment as the Winthrop family housekeeper, she had remained invisible yet omnipresent, a silent witness to the parade of qualified professionals who entered with stellar credentials and left as emotional casualties. The boys weren't evil. Cordelia knew this with the certainty that comes from watching children when they believe no one is looking. She had seen Phineas reading quietly by the window seat during thunderstorms. She had noticed how Rupert left half his dessert for the gardener's apprentice every Thursday. There was something deeper, something unspoken that fueled their rebellion. When Bartholomew stormed into the kitchen 30 minutes later, his designer tie askew and phone clutched like a lifeline, Cordelia knew the employment agency had finally drawn a line. "They refuse to send anyone else," he announced, collapsing onto a bar stool. "Not for a month at minimum. Something about allowing the situation to cool down, as if I can put my life on hold for a month." He dropped his head into his hands, the veneer of Boston aristocracy cracking to reveal a desperately overwhelmed single father. Cordelia placed a cup of coffee before him, black with 2 sugars just as he preferred, and heard herself say the words that would change everything. "I'll look after them, Mr. Winthrop." He looked up, confusion evident in his steel blue eyes. "You? But you're the housekeeper." "Yes, sir," she replied, her Vermont accent slightly more pronounced under pressure. "But before that, I was a mother." The silence that followed was heavy with unasked questions. Cordelia never spoke of her personal life, and Bartholomew had never inquired. The invisible barrier between employer and domestic staff had remained intact, until now. "You have children?" he finally asked. Cordelia's throat tightened. "A son." She didn't elaborate, and something in her expression discouraged further questioning. Bartholomew straightened his tie, weighing impossible options. "No offense, Cordelia, but the twins have broken Harvard-educated child psychologists. You don't have any qualifications." A small, sad smile touched her lips. "With all due respect, sir, neither did those 23 qualified professionals who ran out your door." As the grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 9 times, Bartholomew made a decision born of desperation that would prove to be the most important choice of his life. "1 week," he said, rising from the stool. "You have 1 week. Upstairs, behind a door adorned with keep out signs, the twins high-fived each other, unaware that their lives were about to change forever. The twins' bedroom resembled a war zone dressed in luxury. Designer clothes lay strewn across imported carpets. Expensive toys, many still with price tags attached, created obstacle courses between the door and the matching mahogany beds. The walls, painted in a tasteful blue selected by an interior designer who charged more per hour than Cordelia made in a week, were now decorated with crayon masterpieces and stickers that no amount of gentle cleaner would ever fully remove. Cordelia stood in the doorway, a breakfast tray balanced in her hands, observing the terrain before entering enemy territory. Unlike the previous nannies who had burst in with false cheer and rigid schedules, she simply waited, her presence announced only by the aroma of freshly baked cinnamon rolls. From beneath a fortress of blankets and pillows on the left bed, a tousled head emerged. Rupert, the more strategic of the twins, assessed her with narrowed blue eyes, his father's eyes. "Where's the lady with the clipboard?" he demanded, referring to their latest victim. "Gone," Cordelia replied, her tone matter-of-fact. "I made cinnamon rolls." On the right bed, a pile of blankets shifted. Phineas, 14 minutes younger and perpetually in his brother's shadow, peeked out. His eyes, unlike his twins, were soft brown like his absent mother's. "Gone forever?" he asked cautiously. "Yes." Cordelia entered the room, navigating the obstacle course with practiced ease, and set the tray on a desk cluttered with half-finished homework. "I'll be looking after you for a while." Rupert snorted. "You're the cleaning lady." "Housekeeper," Cordelia corrected without heat. "And now I'm your caretaker too." "For how long?" Phineas asked, sitting up fully now, his Batman pajamas rumpled from sleep. "That depends," Cordelia replied, opening the heavy curtains to reveal a grey Boston skyline, "on how we get along." Rupert scrambled out of bed, his expression incredulous. "Dad would never hire you. You don't have certificates or degrees or anything." Cordelia turned to face him, seeing beyond the defensive posture to the insecurity beneath. "Your father has run out of people with certificates and degrees." She gestured to the breakfast tray. "The rolls are getting cold." The direct simplicity of her approach momentarily disarmed the boys. They exchanged glances, communicating in that silent language unique to twins, before cautiously approaching the desk. "We made the others cry," Rupert warned, reaching for a roll, a statement that was part boast, part admission. "I know," Cordelia acknowledged. "I cleaned up the tissues." Phineas took a roll, avoiding eye contact. "They were mean," he mumbled. "All 23? Cordelia raised an eyebrow. "They didn't understand," Phineas continued softly. "They tried to make us be quiet and proper and—" "Boring," Rupert finished for him, mouth full of cinnamon roll. "Like everything else in this stupid house." Cordelia studied them both, seeing the layers beneath their rebellion. "I don't expect you to be quiet or proper," she said finally. "But I do expect you to be honest with me." The twins exchanged another look, this one tinged with confusion. None of their previous caretakers had requested honesty. They had demanded obedience, schedules, and achievement suitable for children of the Winthrop legacy. "Get dressed," Cordelia continued, moving toward the door. "We have work to do." "School work?" Phineas asked, a note of dread in his voice. Cordelia paused in the doorway. "No. Today we're cleaning this room." "That's your job," Rupert protested. She turned, fixing him with a steady gaze. "Not anymore. Now it's our job." As she closed the door behind her, Cordelia leaned against the wall, heart pounding. She had no idea if her approach would work, but she knew one thing with certainty. These children needed more than discipline and schedules. They needed someone to see them, truly see them, behind the chaos they created. In the kitchen, Bartholomew was hurriedly gathering his briefcase and car keys. He paused when Cordelia entered. "How bad was it?" he asked, bracing for disaster. "They're eating breakfast," she replied simply. His eyebrows rose in surprise. "Already?" "The last nanny said it took her 2 hours to get them out of bed." Cordelia began clearing the morning dishes. "Children respond to different approaches, Mr. Winthrop." He checked his watch, a timepiece worth more than Cordelia's annual salary, and frowned. "I have meetings all day. The school knows you'll be picking them up at 3. As he headed for the door, Cordelia called after him, "Mr. Winthrop, do you ever read the letters?" He turned, confusion evident. "What letters?" "Never mind," she replied. "Have a good day, sir." After he left, Cordelia stood in the silent kitchen, surrounded by the trappings of wealth that had failed to create a home. Somewhere in this mansion of marble and mahogany, two little boys were missing something money couldn't buy, and she had exactly 1 week to discover what it was. The twins' classroom at Briarwood Academy exuded privilege from its polished hardwood floors to the oil paintings of distinguished alumni lining the walls. When Cordelia arrived for pickup, her practical wool coat and sensible shoes drew curious stares from Chanel-clad mothers and uniformed nannies. Mrs. Harrington, the twins' teacher, intercepted Cordelia before she reached the boys. The woman's pinched expression spoke volumes before she even opened her mouth. "You must be the temporary arrangement," she said, managing to infuse the words with both skepticism and condescension. "I should warn you that Rupert disrupted mathematics again, and Phineas daydreamed through most of history." Cordelia nodded, absorbing the information without reaction. "Thank you for letting me know." The teacher leaned closer, pearl necklace swinging forward. "Between us, those boys need structure and consequences. Mr. Winthrop really should consider Briarwood's recommendation for behavioral specialists." Before Cordelia could respond, twin voices called out in unison, "Cordelia?" The boys approached cautiously, as though expecting her to have transformed into a disciplinarian during school hours. "Ready?" she asked simply. Their surprise at the absence of immediate scolding was evident as they followed her to the modest sedan that contrasted sharply with the luxury vehicles lining the pickup lane. "Whose car is this?" Rupert asked, wrinkling his nose at the 5-year-old Toyota. "Mine," Cordelia replied, opening the back doors. "Seatbelts, please." "We usually have a driver," Phineas informed her, though he climbed in without complaint. "Today you have me," Cordelia said, meeting his eyes in the rearview mirror. Something in her steady gaze seemed to comfort him, and he offered a tentative smile. Rather than driving directly home, Cordelia surprised the twins by pulling into the parking lot of a public park. Ancient oak trees cast dappled shadows across open green spaces where children played without designer labels or hovering nannies. "Why are we here?" Rupert demanded, though his eyes tracked a group of boys playing an impromptu baseball game with obvious interest. "I thought we could talk," Cordelia said, turning to face them. "About the letters." Both boys froze, identical expressions of shock spreading across their features. "What letters?" Rupert recovered first, his voice pitched higher than normal. "The ones under your mattress," Cordelia replied gently. "The ones to your mother." Silence filled the car, broken only by the distant shouts of playing children and the soft whisper of Phineas's breathing, which had quickened noticeably. "You read our private stuff?" Rupert accused, anger masking vulnerability. "No," Cordelia shook her head. "I only saw they existed when I was changing your sheets. I didn't read them." Phineas's voice was barely audible. "They're not for reading anyway. They're not even for sending." Cordelia's heart constricted at the quiet resignation in his tone. "Why not?" "Because she doesn't care," Rupert exploded, tears suddenly brimming in his eyes. "She left us. She moved all the way to London and married some British guy and had a new baby and forgot all about us." The pain behind his anger was so raw, so tangible, that Cordelia resisted the urge to reach for him, knowing he would reject comfort in this vulnerable moment. "When was the last time you spoke with her?" she asked instead. Phineas picked at a loose thread on his uniform blazer. "Christmas, for like 5 minutes on the phone. She said she was busy," Rupert added bitterly. "She's always busy." Cordelia considered her next words carefully. "Would you like to send the letters?" The twins exchanged their silent communication again. "What's the point?" Rupert finally said. "Dad says we shouldn't bother her. That's why he hired all those nannies, so we wouldn't need her." "But they're not her," Phineas whispered. In that simple statement, Cordelia understood the root of the twins' behavior. No amount of educational credentials or childcare experience could fill the void their mother had left. The nannies weren't being rejected for their methods. They were being rejected for their very existence as replacements for someone irreplaceable. "No," Cordelia agreed softly. "They're not, and neither am I." The honesty of this acknowledgement hung between them, strangely comforting in its truth. "But I am someone who will listen," she continued. "Someone who won't leave at the first sign of trouble." "You can't promise that," Rupert challenged, his eyes still bright with unshed tears. "Everyone leaves eventually." Cordelia met his gaze directly. I can promise to try harder than the others. Will you let me?" Neither boy answered, but when she suggested they might join the baseball game for a while, both doors opened before she had even finished the sentence. She watched as they approached the other children, awkward and uncertain in their pressed uniforms among jeans and t-shirts. There was a moment of hesitation before the oldest boy in the group waved them over, handing Phineas a battered glove. As the afternoon sun slanted through the oak leaves casting golden patterns across the park, Cordelia witnessed a transformation. With each throw, each cheer from newfound teammates, the twins shed layers of the pretense required in their privileged world. Here they were just boys, sweaty, laughing, occasionally failing without consequence beyond good-natured teasing. When it was time to leave, they returned to the car flushed and disheveled, their uniforms bearing grass stains that would horrify their father's dry cleaner. "Did you see when I caught that fly ball?" Phineas exclaimed, more animated than Cordelia had ever witnessed. "Lucky catch," Rupert teased, but his grin contradicted the critique. "I got a double hit." As Cordelia drove them home, the back seat filled with excited recounting of their brief taste of normalcy, she pondered the irony. These children, who had everything money could provide, were starved for the simplest experiences. Unstructured play, genuine connection, the freedom to be imperfect. Back at the mansion, the twins raced upstairs to change, their usual reluctance to return home noticeably absent. Cordelia headed to the kitchen to prepare dinner, her mind already forming plans for the days ahead. The battle was far from won, but a small breach had appeared in the twins' defenses. A crack just wide enough to let in possibility. That evening, after tucking the boys in, a ritual they accepted with only token protests about being too old, Cordelia sat at her small desk in her modest quarters off the kitchen. By lamplight she penned a letter of her own to a son whose face had begun to blur in her memory, despite her desperate efforts to hold on to every detail. "My dearest Evander, today I watched 2 boys play baseball and thought of you. Are you still playing? I remember how you loved the feel of the bat connecting with the ball, the perfect crack of solid contact." She wrote until her eyes grew heavy, knowing, like the twins, that her letter would remain unsent. Some wounds were too deep, some bridges too thoroughly burned, but in the act of writing, in the acknowledgement of loss, she found a renewed sense of purpose. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but for tonight, in a house full of broken people pretending to be whole, a fragile connection had been formed. By Friday, Cordelia's unorthodox approach had produced results that left Bartholomew both impressed and bewildered. The twins had attended school without incident for 3 consecutive days. Their bedroom, while not immaculate, had transformed from disaster zone to merely messy, the natural state of 8-year-old boys. Most surprisingly, they had begun completing homework without the battles that had previously consumed entire evenings. "How?" Bartholomew asked over his morning coffee, watching as Cordelia prepared lunchboxes with an efficiency that belied the thoughtfulness behind each selection. "How have you managed this in days when professionals failed for months?" Cordelia placed homemade oatmeal cookies, sweetened with honey rather than refined sugar, into each box. "I made some changes to their routine." "Obviously," he replied with a hint of impatience, "but what specifically? I need to know for whoever takes over next week." The reminder of her temporary status stung more than Cordelia had anticipated. She focused on securing the lunchbox lids before responding. "We go to the park every afternoon before homework. They need to run, to play, to get dirty." She met his questioning gaze. "And we talk. Really talk, not just about school or behavior." Bartholomew's expression shifted subtly. "About what?" "About their mother, for one thing." His coffee cup froze halfway to his lips. "That's not... We don't discuss Eleanor in this house." "They need to," Cordelia said gently. "They're writing her letters they never send. They're acting out because they're hurt and confused, and no one will acknowledge the elephant in the room." Bartholomew set down his cup with controlled precision. "My former wife chose to abandon her children for a new life in London. What good does it do to dwell on that? It helps them process their feelings instead of acting them out on every nanny you hire," Cordelia replied, her usual deference tempered by conviction. "Children need to express pain, not suppress it." A tense silence settled between them, broken only when the twins thundered down the stairs, arguing about whose turn it was to feed Perseus, the reluctant class hamster they'd brought home for the weekend. "My week is almost up," Cordelia continued quietly as the boys entered the kitchen. "But they're making progress. Real progress." Bartholomew watched his sons, animated, engaged, arguing passionately but without the destructive edge that had characterized their behavior for months, and sighed. "We'll revisit this conversation on Sunday," he conceded, rising from his seat. He squeezed each boy's shoulder affectionately before retrieving his briefcase. "Behave for Cordelia today." "We will," they answered in unusual unison, already focused on the promised trip to the Science Museum that afternoon. After he left, Cordelia directed the boys to finish their breakfast. "Perseus needs to be fed before school," she reminded them. Rupert, mouthful of toast, mumbled, "He's the most boring pet ever. He just sleeps and poops." "We should get a dog," Phineas suggested, not for the first time. "A big one that can play fetch and stuff." "Your father is allergic," Cordelia reminded him, having learned this detail during one of their afternoon conversations. "Convenient excuse," Rupert muttered. "He's allergic to anything fun." Cordelia wiped down the counter, choosing her words carefully. "Your father works very hard to give you everything he thinks you need." "Except time," Phineas said quietly, pushing his cereal bowl away half-finished. "He's never home." The observation hung in the air, painfully accurate. In the 4 days since Cordelia had taken charge of the twins, Bartholomew had returned home after their bedtime twice, and spent most of the weekend sequestered in his home office. "Maybe we could talk to him about that," Cordelia suggested. "This weekend? Perhaps plan something together?" The twins exchanged their communicative glance again. "We used to have family dinner on Saturdays," Rupert recalled, "before Mom left, with candles and everything, even though we weren't allowed to touch them." "Yeah," Phineas nodded, eyes distant with memory. "And after, we'd play board games or watch a movie." Cordelia saw the opening and seized it. "Why don't we suggest reviving that tradition? I could prepare something special." The spark of interest in their eyes confirmed her instinct. These children didn't need more structure or discipline. They needed connection, continuity. The reassurance that despite profound changes, some threads of their former life could remain intact. That evening, after the Science Museum excursion that had left all three of them pleasantly exhausted, Cordelia knocked on Bartholomew's office door. The space, like the man himself, projected authority and old-world elegance. Leather-bound books, a massive mahogany desk, oil paintings of stern-faced Winthrop ancestors judging from gilt frames. "Come in," he called, not looking up from his laptop. "Excuse me, Mr. Winthrop," Cordelia began, remaining near the door. "The boys have a request." This caught his attention. He removed his reading glasses, rubbing the bridge of his nose where they had left small indentations. "A request? Not a demand. That's progress." Cordelia smiled slightly. "They would like to resume Saturday family dinners. They mentioned it was a tradition before." Bartholomew's expression clouded. That was Eleanor's idea. She insisted on the formal dining room, proper place settings. Teaching them etiquette, she claimed, though it usually ended with someone crying. "It doesn't have to be formal," Cordelia suggested. "Just together." He studied her with newfound curiosity. "You're not what I expected, Cordelia." "Sir? When you offered to care for the boys, I assumed it was about the potential pay increase." He leaned back in his chair. "But it's more than that for you, isn't it?" Cordelia clasped her hands to stop their slight trembling. This conversation was veering into territory she had carefully avoided for years. "I believe children deserve stability and understanding." "Yes, but why do you care so much about my children?" The question hung between them, dangerously direct. Cordelia chose her words with precision. "Because I recognize what they're going through." She met his gaze steadily. "And because I'm in a position to help if you'll let me." Bartholomew regarded her for a long moment, as though seeing beyond the role of housekeeper to the woman beneath. "Saturday dinner," he finally nodded. "I'll clear my schedule." "Thank you, sir. They'll be thrilled." As she turned to leave, he added, "And Cordelia, your week is extended, indefinitely for now." Relief washed through her, though she maintained her composure. "Yes, sir, thank you." That night, as rain pattered against the windows of her small quarters, Cordelia added another entry to the journal she'd begun keeping since taking charge of the twins. Between observations about Phineas's apparent difficulty with reading and Rupert's protective hovering during school assignments, she wrote, "They're letting me in, bit by bit. Today, Phineas showed me his rock collection, each specimen carefully labelled in his uneven handwriting. Rupert pretended disinterest, but knew the name of every single one. These aren't the demons everyone describes. They're just boys wounded and wary, testing to see if I'm another disappointment waiting to happen. I recognize myself in Bartholomew's exhausted eyes. We're both trying to atone for something, both failing more often than succeeding. The difference is I know what I'm atoning for. She closed the journal and placed it in the drawer beside her bed, next to a tattered photograph of a toddler with her eyes and a smile that still haunted her dreams. Tomorrow would bring the challenge of a Saturday with both boys and their father under one roof, an opportunity for healing or for reopening wounds barely beginning to scab over. Cordelia fell asleep to the rhythm of rain and the weight of responsibilities she had never anticipated when she first knocked on the imposing door of the Beacon Hill mansion 3 years ago, seeking only employment and anonymity in a city where no one knew her name or her story. April arrived with deceptive gentleness, coaxing crocuses from the mansion's manicured lawns and softening Boston's sharp edges with pale green buds. Inside, a more complex awakening was unfolding. "I don't want to." Phineas hurled his reading textbook across the library, narrowly missing an antique globe. His chest heaved with emotion, face flushed with frustration and embarrassment. "I'm not stupid." "No one said you were stupid," Cordelia replied calmly, retrieving the book. "Reading is difficult for some people. It doesn't reflect on your intelligence." "Tell that to Mrs. Harrington," Rupert interjected from the window seat where he'd been observing the confrontation. "She called him academically challenged in front of everyone yesterday." Cordelia's jaw tightened at this information, which the twins had concealed until now. For 3 weeks, she had noticed Phineas's struggles with reading, the way his eyes jumped across the page, his confusion over similar-looking words, his remarkable ability to memorize passages he'd heard rather than truly reading them. She had suspected dyslexia, but had waited for the right moment to address it. "Mrs. Harrington is wrong," she stated firmly, "and unkind." Phineas looked up, surprise momentarily overriding his distress. Adults in his world rarely criticized other adults, particularly teachers at Briarwood Academy, where tuition costs rivaled college fees. "But I'm behind everyone," he mumbled, picking at a loose thread on his sweater. "Dad's going to be mad." "Your father wants you to succeed," Cordelia corrected gently. "And there are many paths to success." She sat beside him on the leather sofa, keeping a respectful distance while still conveying presence. "I think you might have dyslexia. It's not uncommon, and it has nothing to do with how smart you are." "What's dyslexia?" Rupert abandoned his post by the window, curiosity piqued. "It means your brain processes written information differently," Cordelia explained. "Words might appear to jump around or reverse themselves. It can make reading traditional text very challenging." Phineas frowned. Can it be fixed?" "It's not something that needs fixing," Cordelia emphasized. "It's a difference, not a defect, and there are many techniques and tools that can help." She had been researching late into the night, borrowing books from the Boston Public Library and printing articles from internet cafes when the boys were at school. Without official authority to seek professional assessment, she had done what she could to educate herself. "Like what?" Phineas asked, the first glimmer of hope appearing in his expression. "Well, for starters, colored overlays sometimes help the words stay still on the page." Cordelia reached into her bag and pulled out a transparent blue sheet she had purchased that morning. "And there are special fonts designed specifically for dyslexic readers." She handed him a printed passage using one such font. "Try this and see if it's any easier." As Phineas cautiously accepted the paper, Rupert moved closer, protective instinct evident in his posture. "If Finn has dyslexia, how come nobody noticed before?" "Because he's very clever," Cordelia answered honestly. "He's found ways to compensate." "And because—" She hesitated, weighing her words carefully. "Sometimes adults see what they expect to see rather than what's actually there." Rupert nodded sagely. "Like when Mrs. Peterson thought I stole the class hamster when it was really in her desk drawer the whole time." "Something like that," Cordelia smiled. "The important thing is that we know now, and we can help." Phineas looked up from the modified text, a tentative smile forming. "This is better. The letters don't swim around as much." "We should tell Dad," Rupert declared, with the decisiveness that characterized his approach to life. "He can make Briarwood help Finn properly." Cordelia nodded, though inwardly she felt apprehensive. Bartholomew's reaction would be crucial. He could either become an ally in supporting Phineas or inadvertently reinforce the shame the boy already felt. "Yes, we should. But let me talk to him first," she suggested, to explain the situation properly. The twins exchanged one of their silent communications before Phineas nodded, trust evident in his eyes, trust that Cordelia had earned through weeks of consistent presence and genuine concern. That evening, when Bartholomew returned home earlier than usual, she seized the opportunity to speak with him privately. In his study, surrounded by generations of Winthrop success immortalized in portraits and awards, she explained her observations and suspicions regarding Phineas's learning differences. Dyslexia? Bartholomew frowned, swirling amber liquid in a crystal tumbler. "That's not possible. The Winthrop men have attended Harvard for 5 generations. We don't have learning disabilities." Cordelia maintained her composure despite the dismissal. "Dyslexia has nothing to do with intelligence or potential, Mr. Winthrop. Many brilliant, successful people have dyslexia. Artists, entrepreneurs, innovators. Have you had him professionally assessed?" he challenged. "Or is this another of your intuitive approaches?" The slight edge in his tone stung, but Cordelia stood her ground. "I've observed his reading patterns for weeks. I've researched the symptoms extensively. So I've tried alternative methods that have already shown improvement." She took a breath. "But no, I haven't sought professional assessment because that would require your authorization." Bartholomew set down his glass with a sharp click against the mahogany desk. "And you didn't think to consult me before conducting this amateur diagnosis?" "I wanted to be certain before concerning you," she replied, maintaining a respectful tone despite the heat rising in her cheeks. "Phineas is incredibly bright, but he's struggling unnecessarily. With proper support." "I pay $40,000 annually for proper support at Briarwood," he interrupted. "If there were an issue, surely their educational experts would have identified it." Cordelia hesitated, then decided directness was necessary, not if they were too busy labeling him as difficult rather than looking for the cause of his difficulties. Bartholomew's expression hardened. "You're overstepping, Cordelia." "Perhaps," she acknowledged, "but I'm also right." The tension between them crystallized in the silence that followed. Employer and employee, privilege and practicality, theory and lived experience. Cordelia had risked her position by challenging him, but Phineas's well-being outweighed her job security. Finally, Bartholomew sighed, age and weariness briefly visible beneath his polished exterior. "What do you suggest?" Relief flooded through her. "Have him properly assessed by a specialist. In the meantime, we can implement some basic accommodations, colored overlays, audiobooks to supplement reading, allowing more time for written assignments." He nodded slowly. "I'll make some calls tomorrow." "There's one more thing," Cordelia added, seizing the moment of receptivity. "Phineas needs to know you don't think less of him for this, that you're proud of how hard he works despite the challenges." Something shifted in Bartholomew's expression, a softening, a recognition. "Of course I'm proud of him. He's my son. He needs to hear it," Cordelia pressed gently. "They both do." Later that night, passing the twins' room on her way to her quarters, Cordelia paused at the sound of Bartholomew's voice. The door was ajar, and through the crack she could see him sitting on the edge of Phineas's bed, one hand resting on his son's shoulder. "You know, my father was terrible at mathematics," he was saying. "Absolutely dreadful. He hired 3 separate tutors before Harvard." "Really?" Phineas sounded skeptical but hopeful. "Really. Everyone has things that come easily and things that require more effort. The Winthrop way isn't about being perfect at everything. It's about never giving up on something that matters." Cordelia moved quietly away, giving them privacy for this rare moment of connection. As she prepared for bed in her small room, she reflected on the day's events, recognizing the significance of what had transpired. For perhaps the first time, she had pushed beyond the boundaries of her role as employee, and Bartholomew had responded not with dismissal, but with consideration. A small shift, perhaps, but in the rarefied atmosphere of Beacon Hill, where tradition and appearance reigned supreme, it felt momentous, like the first crack in a dam that had held back genuine emotion for too long. What neither she nor Bartholomew could have anticipated was that this small breach would soon widen, challenging everything they thought they knew about family, connection, and the true meaning of wealth. May painted Boston in vibrant greens and pinks, cherry blossoms floating like snow along Commonwealth Avenue. Inside the Winthrop mansion, equally significant transformations were unfolding. Cordelia stood in the formal dining room, surveying the chaos with a mixture of dismay and amusement. The massive mahogany table, normally reserved for holiday gatherings and business dinners, was now covered with newspapers, paint cups, brushes, and two industrious 8-year-olds creating what they solemnly described as abstract expressionist masterpieces. "Look, Cordelia." Phineas held up canvas smeared with vibrant blues and greens. "It's the ocean from Cape Cod. Remember from the pictures you showed us?" "Very evocative," she nodded seriously, using one of the art vocabulary words they'd been learning. Since his dyslexia diagnosis, Phineas had blossomed with alternative learning methods. Audiobooks, verbal discussions, and artistic expression had revealed an insightful mind previously obscured by reading difficulties. Rupert, never to be outdone, thrust his own creation forward, a swirl of reds and oranges that seemed to leap from the canvas. "Mine's a supernova explosion, like in that astronomy book." "Powerful," Cordelia approved. "Your father will be impressed." Both boys stilled at this, exchanging their telepathic glance. "Is he really coming to our art show tonight?" Rupert asked, skepticism evident. "He's missed the last 2 Saturday dinners." "He promised," Cordelia reminded them, though she shared their uncertainty. Bartholomew's work commitments had intensified recently, with late nights and weekend conference calls becoming the norm rather than the exception. The boys returned to their painting, but the energy had dimmed slightly. Cordelia began cleaning brushes, giving them space while remaining present, a balance she had perfected over the past 2 months. The twins' art show had been her idea, a way to celebrate Phineas's progress and showcase both boys' creativity. They had invited their father with handmade invitations, specifying a precise time and requesting formal attire, with the solemnity only children can muster for such occasions. When her phone buzzed with a text message, Cordelia's heart sank. The boys, attuned to her expressions after months in her care, looked up immediately. "It's him, isn't it?" Rupert's voice was flat. "He's not coming." Cordelia checked the message and felt unexpected relief. "Actually, he's asking if he can bring something home for dessert." The tension in the room dissipated instantly, replaced by animated debate about the relative merits of chocolate cake versus ice cream. Cordelia sent a quick affirmative reply, adding a reminder about the 7 Mars p.m. gallery opening. As she supervised the cleanup of art supplies, her mind drifted to the subtle changes in Bartholomew over recent weeks. The formal Mr. Winthrop had gradually given way to Bartholomew in their increasingly frequent conversations. He had begun arriving home earlier on random evenings, sometimes joining them for simple activities. A board game, a documentary about marine life that fascinated the twins. Once even a chaotic attempt at baking cookies that left the kitchen dusted with flour, and all 4 of them laughing until their sides ached. These moments remained sporadic, interrupted by the demands of whatever crisis consumed his professional attention lately. Cordelia had noticed the tense phone calls, the furrow between his brows that deepened daily, the occasional muttered comments about market volatility and overextended assets. Without prying, she had gathered that the Winthrop financial empire was facing significant challenges. "Can we hang the paintings in the hallway?" Phineas asked, interrupting her thoughts. "Like a real gallery." "Excellent idea," she agreed. "But first, you both need to change for the opening. Artists must look professional, after all." They raced upstairs to don the button-down shirts and ties they had insisted on for the occasion, leaving Cordelia to contemplate the transformation of this household. From the war zone she had entered 2 months ago to this place of creativity and cautious joy. The change was remarkable, yet still fragile, dependent on the consistent presence and attention she provided. Later, as she helped the boys arrange their artwork along the main hallway, complete with handwritten description cards, dictated by Phineas, written by Rupert in his precise penmanship, the front door opened. Bartholomew entered, looking uncharacteristically disheveled despite his expensive suit. His tie was loosened, hair slightly mussed as though he'd been running frustrated hands through it. Most telling was the tightness around his eyes, the look of a man carrying burdens invisible to others. All this Cordelia observed in an instant before the twins launched themselves at their father with exclamations of greeting. To his credit, Bartholomew immediately set down his briefcase and the bakery box he carried, crouching to receive their enthusiastic welcome. "I hear there's an important cultural event tonight," he said, straightening his tie as he rose. "I wouldn't miss it." The pride in the boy's expressions made Cordelia's heart twist. Such a simple thing, a father's presence, his attention, yet so profound in its impact. "Welcome to the Winthrop Gallery of Fine Arts," Rupert announced with theatrical formality. "Please follow the exhibition path." He gestured grandly down the hallway where their canvases hung at 8-year-old eye level. For the next half hour, Bartholomew was the perfect gallery patron, asking thoughtful questions about each piece, admiring technique, and appearing genuinely impressed by his son's creativity. Cordelia remained in the background, observing the interaction with quiet satisfaction. The gala reception that followed in the dining room featured sparkling apple juice in crystal glasses and the chocolate cake Bartholomew had brought. As the boys debated which painting should have the honor of being displayed in their father's office, Bartholomew approached Cordelia. "Thank you for this," he said quietly. "It's exactly what I needed today." Something in his tone, a rawness beneath the polished exterior, prompted her to ask, "Is everything all right?" He glanced toward the twins, ensuring they were out of earshot. "Not particularly, no. But this isn't the time to discuss it." Cordelia nodded, respecting the boundary. "Later, perhaps." The question hung between them, an offer of support that transcended their employer-employee relationship. Bartholomew studied her face for a moment before nodding almost imperceptibly. That night, after the twins had been tucked in, still buzzing with the success of their artistic debut, Cordelia found Bartholomew in his study. The room was dimly lit, the only illumination coming from a desk lamp that cast his face in harsh shadows as he reviewed documents spread before him. She knocked softly on the open door. "You wanted to speak with me?" He looked up, momentarily disoriented, as though pulled from deep concentration. "Yes, come in. Close the door, please." Cordelia complied, taking the seat he indicated across from his desk. A glass of scotch sat untouched near his right hand. "I'm not entirely sure why I'm telling you this," he began, rubbing his temples. "Perhaps because you've proven remarkably adept at solving impossible situations in this house." "I'm happy to help if I can," she replied carefully. Bartholomew leaned back in his chair, exhaustion evident in every line of his body. "The Winthrop Investment Group is in trouble. Significant trouble." The admission clearly cost him, his pride visibly warring with the relief of sharing his burden. "The market crash affected us more severely than I initially admitted to our investors. We've been over-leveraged in certain sectors that have continued to underperform." He sighed heavily. "In simple terms, I'm facing the very real possibility of bankruptcy." Cordelia absorbed this information, understanding its significance not just financially, but culturally for a family whose name had symbolized wealth and success for generations. "What would that mean, practically speaking?" she asked. "Everything changes," he replied bluntly. "This house, the boys' school, our entire lifestyle. The Winthrop name becomes associated with failure rather than excellence." His voice tightened. "After 5 generations of building this legacy, I would be the one to lose it all." The weight of this responsibility was palpable, explaining the increased absences, the late nights, the distraction even when physically present. "Have you spoken with the boys about this possibility?" Cordelia ventured. Bartholomew looked startled. "Of course not. They're children. They shouldn't have to worry about such things." "They're already worrying," she pointed out gently. "They sense something's wrong but don't understand what. That can be more frightening than the truth." He considered this, rotating the untouched scotch glass slowly. "What would you suggest?" "Sorry, boys, Daddy's business is failing and we might lose everything." "Not exactly," Cordelia replied, unfazed by his sarcasm, "but perhaps something honest about facing challenges as a family. Children are remarkably resilient when they feel included, rather than protected through deception." Bartholomew studied her with newfound curiosity. "So you speak from experience." It wasn't a question, but Cordelia felt the implicit invitation to share more of herself, a reciprocation for his own vulnerability. After months of careful boundaries, she made a decision. "Yes," she acknowledged softly. When my son was 4, we lost our home. I couldn't shield him from that reality, so I involved him in the process of starting over. We talked about what truly makes a home, people, not possessions. He handled it better than I did, actually. The admission hung in the air between them. Bartholomew's expression shifted from professional consideration to genuine interest. "You've never spoken about your son before. How old is he now?" Cordelia's throat tightened. 14. "Does he live with his father?" "No." The single word carried volumes of unspoken pain. Bartholomew, perceptive despite his privileged blind spots, recognized the boundary and didn't press further. Instead, he returned to the immediate concern. "I've explored every possible avenue to salvage the situation. There's a potential investor who might provide the capital we need to weather this storm, but the negotiations are complicated." He sighed. "In the meantime, I need to prepare for the worst while still fighting for the best outcome." "That sounds like wisdom, not weakness," Cordelia observed. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "I appreciate the generous interpretation." He straightened in his chair, some of his customary authority returning. "Thank you for listening, Cordelia, and for what you've done with the boys. Whatever happens with the business, that remains the most important success." The acknowledgement warmed her unexpectedly. "They're remarkable children. They just needed someone to really see them." As she rose to leave, Bartholomew added, "I'd appreciate your discretion about this conversation." "Of course," she assured him. "Good night, Bartholomew." As she closed the study door behind her, Cordelia felt the subtle but significant shift in their relationship. Employer and employee still, yes. But now something more complex was emerging, a partnership of sorts built on mutual respect and shared concern for two young boys whose world might soon be upended in ways they couldn't yet imagine. In her small room later that night, Cordelia wrote in her journal, "The mansion feels different tonight, less a monument to wealth and more a home under siege. Strange how crisis strips away pretense. In his vulnerability, I saw not Bartholomew Winthrop III, Boston financial scion, but simply a father frightened for his children's future. Perhaps this is what the twins have needed all along, not the perfect, invulnerable patriarch, but the authentic, struggling human being. And perhaps, in this unexpected way, financial ruin might offer what money never could, a family bound by something stronger than the Winthrop name." June arrived with unseasonable heat that transformed Boston into a shimmering mirage of concrete and glass. Inside the Winthrop mansion, despite the efficient air conditioning that kept the temperature a perfect 72 degrees, different kinds of pressure were building. "I don't want to go to grandfather's," Phineas declared, arms crossed defiantly as he stood in the kitchen doorway. "He calls me young man and asks math questions during dinner." Rupert, lounging against the refrigerator with practiced nonchalance, added, "And he always says my hair is too long. And he doesn't let us swim in his pool until exactly 3 hours after eating." Cordelia continued preparing lunch, letting the boys vent their grievances. The annual 4th of July weekend at Harrison Winthrop's Cape Cod estate was apparently a tradition weighted with formality and expectations, one more source of anxiety in an already tense household. "Your grandfather is from a different generation," she offered diplomatically. "Sometimes older people have different ideas about how children should behave. He makes Dad act weird," Rupert observed with the brutal honesty of childhood, all stiff and serious, like when the headmaster visits school. This insight didn't surprise Cordelia. Over the past month, as Bartholomew's financial concerns had intensified, she had witnessed subtle shifts in his behavior, increased irritability, distraction during family dinners, hushed phone conversations that ended abruptly when anyone entered the room. The prospect of a weekend under his father's critical gaze would only compound the pressure. "Perhaps you could prepare some topics to discuss with your grandfather," she suggested. "Things that interest you both." Phineas brightened slightly. "He likes history. Maybe I could listen to some more Revolutionary War audiobooks before we go." "Excellent idea," Cordelia approved, sliding sandwiches onto plates. "And Rupert, didn't you read about Cape Cod shipwrecks for your history project? Grandfather might enjoy hearing about that." The boys settled at the kitchen island, their resistance softening as they formulated strategies for navigating the dreaded weekend. Cordelia marveled at their resilience, their ability to adapt and problem-solve despite the emotional complexities of their young lives. When Bartholomew entered the kitchen an hour later, his appearance immediately signaled trouble. Though impeccably dressed as always, the strain showed in the tightness around his eyes and the unconscious gesture of repeatedly adjusting his already perfect tie. "Cordelia, may I speak with you?" he requested, glancing at the twins. "Boys, please finish your lunch and then complete your summer reading assignment. I'll check your progress this evening." After the children reluctantly departed, Bartholomew closed the kitchen door, an unusual precaution that heightened Cordelia's concern. "The investor pulled out," he stated without preamble, voice carefully controlled. "After weeks of negotiations, promises, preliminary agreements, gone. Apparently their board had reservations about existing liability exposure." The technical jargon barely masked his bitterness. Cordelia absorbed this news, understanding its devastating implications. "What happens now? I have approximately 3 weeks before I must make public disclosures that will effectively end Winthrop Investment Group as it currently exists." He leaned against the counter, momentarily allowing his perfect posture to falter. "I've already consulted with restructuring specialists and attorneys. The mansion will likely need to be sold, along with most of our assets." The clinical way he outlined the dismantling of his family's legacy broke Cordelia's heart more than any emotional display could have. "I'm so sorry, Bartholomew." He straightened, armor sliding back into place. "I need to tell my father this weekend." Harrison Winthrop, who turned a respectable family business into a financial powerhouse, will learn that his son has destroyed it in a single generation. The self-recrimination in his voice prompted Cordelia to respond with unusual directness. "The entire global economy collapsed. Thousands of businesses are failing. This isn't a personal moral failing." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Try telling that to Harrison Winthrop, who navigated the 1987 crash without losing a single client." "Different times, different circumstances," Cordelia insisted. "And regardless, what matters most is how this affects your son's, not your father's opinion." Bartholomew's expression shifted, vulnerability briefly visible beneath his controlled exterior. "That's the worst part. I've failed them most of all." Cordelia chose her next words carefully, aware she was overstepping traditional boundaries, but unable to remain silent. Children don't need financial perfection. They need emotional presence. The twins would choose a father who's truly with them in a small apartment over a distant provider in a mansion. Something in her tone must have revealed more than she intended, because Bartholomew studied her with sudden intensity. "Is that what happened with your son? You chose presence over provision?" The direct question caught her off guard. For months, she had maintained careful privacy around her past, sharing only fragments when necessary for the twins' benefit. Now, faced with Bartholomew's genuine inquiry in his moment of crisis, the old walls seemed both necessary and impossible to maintain. "The opposite," she admitted quietly. "I worked 3 jobs trying to provide the basics. Time became the luxury I couldn't afford. When the court deemed me an inadequate provider due to excessive work hours and insufficient supervision, the irony nearly destroyed me. The pain of that memory, usually kept carefully contained, surfaced unexpectedly, bringing a tightness to her throat that made further speech impossible. Bartholomew absorbed this revelation in silence. When he finally spoke, his voice held none of the judgment she had feared. Life is rarely fair to those without safety nets. The simple acknowledgement of this truth, so obvious yet so rarely recognized by those born into privilege, created a moment of genuine connection between them. "The boys will be devastated about the Cape Cod trip," he continued after a moment, returning to immediate concerns. "It's one of the few family traditions they genuinely enjoy, despite their complaints about my father's formality." "Could you still go?" Cordelia suggested. "One last weekend before everything changes? A chance to create memories they'll hold on to during the transition ahead?" Bartholomew considered this, conflict evident in his expression. "Perhaps. Though facing my father knowing what's coming, sometimes the hardest conversations are the most necessary," Cordelia observed gently. He nodded. Decision made. "We'll go. And I'll tell my father privately after the boys are asleep." He hesitated before adding, "Would you consider joining us? The boys would appreciate your presence, and frankly, so would I." The invitation stunned Cordelia. The Cape Cod estate was the domain of family and social equals, not household staff. "I couldn't possibly—" "You're more than an employee at this point," Bartholomew interrupted. "You've become essential to this family's functioning. Besides, my father should meet the woman who accomplished what 24 professional nannies couldn't." Put that way, the invitation became both a recognition of her contribution and a strategic move to demonstrate to Harrison Winthrop that not all was lost, despite financial setbacks. Still, the prospect of entering that rarefied world as something between staff and family member filled Cordelia with trepidation. "The boys would be thrilled," Bartholomew added, recognizing her hesitation. "Consider it at least." When he left, Cordelia stood motionless in the kitchen, aware that she stood at a crossroads. Accepting the invitation would blur boundaries already growing dangerously indistinct, yet refusing would deprive the twins of support during what might be their final visit to a beloved family property. That evening, after helping the boys pack for the weekend, including diplomatic haircuts for Rupert and new books on revolutionary history for Phineas, Cordelia made her decision. If the Winthrop family was about to face its greatest challenge, her place was alongside the children who had come to rely on her stability. Professional distance could no longer justify emotional absence. When she informed Bartholomew of her acceptance, the relief in his expression confirmed she had made the right choice. For the twins, for him, and perhaps, in ways she wasn't yet ready to acknowledge, for herself. The following morning, as they departed for Cape Cod in Bartholomew's luxury sedan, Cordelia caught a glimpse of her reflection in the window. Not quite housekeeper, not quite family, occupying a unique space created by circumstance and connection. Whatever awaited at the ancestral Winthrop estate, she would face it with the same quiet determination that had carried her through far worse storms than the disapproval of Boston aristocracy. The Winthrop estate on Cape Cod existed in a different dimension from the Boston mansion, older, more imposing, wrapped in the patina of old money that no modern fortune could replicate. Perched on a bluff overlooking the Atlantic, the sprawling white colonial with its perfect symmetry and meticulous gardens practically exhaled privilege from every dormer window and cedar shingle. As Bartholomew's car crunched up the oyster-shell driveway, Cordelia felt acutely out of place. Her simple sundress and cardigan, perfectly appropriate for a holiday weekend by normal standards, seemed hopelessly inadequate against the backdrop of generational wealth. "Grandfather's waiting." Rupert pointed to the imposing figure standing on the front portico, a taller, silver-haired version of Bartholomew with the same aristocratic features hardened by additional decades of authority. The twins bounded from the car with surprising enthusiasm, given their earlier complaints. Watching their transformation into perfect young gentlemen, back straight, voices modulated, offering firm handshakes, Cordelia glimpsed the weight of expectation they carried, even at 8 years old. "Father," Bartholomew greeted, his own posture subtly shifting to mirror the older man's formal bearing. "You remember Cordelia Reynolds? She's been invaluable with the boys these past months." Harrison Winthrop's assessment was swift and clinical, taking in Cordelia's modest appearance with a glance that categorized and dismissed her simultaneously. "Of course, the housekeeper who became Nanny. Most unconventional. Cordelia is more of a tutor now," Phineas piped up, protective instinct overriding his usual reserve around his grandfather. "She helps me with my dyslexia special techniques." Harrison's eyebrows rose fractionally. "Dyslexia? I wasn't aware of any learning difficulties." "Not difficulties," Rupert corrected with surprising boldness. "Differences. Finn's brain works differently, but he's still smart." Cordelia felt a surge of pride at the twins' defense, even as she registered Harrison's barely concealed disapproval. Bartholomew smoothly redirected the conversation, ushering everyone inside with mentions of refreshments and unpacking. The weekend unfolded like an elaborate theatrical production in which everyone played carefully scripted roles. Harrison presided over meals with patriarchal authority, peppering conversations with subtle tests of the twins' knowledge and manners. Bartholomew maintained perfect composure, revealing nothing of the financial catastrophe looming on the horizon. The boys performed admirably, showcasing their academic progress and social graces, while occasionally shooting glances at Cordelia for reassurance. For her part, Cordelia navigated the complex social terrain cautiously, aware of Harrison's watching eyes and the household staff's curious appraisal. She was neither fish nor fowl in this environment, not family, yet seated at the family table, not staff, yet clearly not a social equal. The first significant confrontation occurred Saturday morning when Harrison discovered Cordelia helping the twins construct elaborate sandcastles on the private beach below the estate. "Mrs. Reynolds," he addressed her formally, though she had never used that title. "I wonder if I might have a word." The twins, engrossed in creating moats and battlements, barely noticed as Cordelia followed Harrison a short distance away, her bare feet sinking into warm sand that somehow felt like foreign territory under his disapproving gaze. "I appreciate your enthusiasm," he began with the practiced diplomacy of someone accustomed to difficult conversations. "However, I'm concerned about the boundaries of your role in my grandsons' lives." Cordelia waited, sensing more to come. "The boys seem quite attached to you," he continued. "While that may be convenient for immediate behavioral management, I question whether such dependency is healthy for their long-term development." "The twins aren't dependent," Cordelia replied carefully. "They're secure. There's a difference." Harrison's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. Children of the Winthrop line have always been raised to independence and self-reliance. Emotional coddling, while perhaps well-intentioned, does them no service in preparing for their future responsibilities. The implicit criticism stung, but Cordelia maintained her composure. "With respect, Mr. Winthrop, emotional connection isn't coddling. It's foundation building. A rather modern perspective," he observed, with the faintest note of condescension. "In my experience, character is built through appropriate challenge and expectation, not indulgence." Before Cordelia could respond, Phineas called excitedly, "Cordelia, come see. We built the Boston State House with the gold dome and everything." Harrison's gaze flicked between the boy's animated expression and Cordelia's face. "We'll continue this discussion another time," he concluded, the dismissal clear in his tone. Throughout the day, similar moments accumulated. Harrison questioning the audiobooks Cordelia had selected for Phineas. Adaptations are hardly literature. Criticizing the twins' enthusiastic but imperfect piano performance. Excellence requires discipline, not merely enjoyment. And repeatedly reminding everyone of the Winthrop legacy of achievement. By evening, the cumulative weight of disapproval had created a palpable tension throughout the house. Even the twins, resilient as they were, had grown quieter, their natural exuberance dampened by the effort of measuring up to expectations that seemed to shift with each interaction. After the boys were finally asleep, Cordelia retreated to the guest bedroom assigned to her, a beautiful space that nonetheless clearly communicated her ambiguous status through its location in a separate wing from the family quarters. She was contemplating this subtle geography of belonging when a soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Bartholomew stood in the hallway, tension evident in the set of his shoulders, despite his casual attire. "If you're not too tired, perhaps a walk. The gardens are particularly peaceful at night." The invitation felt significant, a momentary escape from the roles they'd been playing all day. In the moonlit garden, with the sound of distant waves providing gentle background music, they walked in companionable silence until Bartholomew finally spoke. "I apologize for my father's behavior. Subtlety has never been his strong suit." Cordelia smiled slightly. "I've encountered far worse than polite disapproval, believe me." "Still," he insisted, "you're here as my guest. His treatment of you reflects poorly on my hospitality." They paused beside a stone fountain, its gentle splashing creating a private space for conversation amid the manicured landscape. "He's concerned about the boys," Cordelia observed neutrally. "From his perspective, I represent an approach to child-rearing that contradicts his values." Bartholomew's laugh held little humor. "My father's values prioritize achievement over happiness, legacy over connection. The perfect Winthrop success formula that produced," he gestured vaguely toward the darkened coastline, "a financial disaster about to unfold, and 2 children who until recently were so unhappy they drove away every qualified caretaker." The bitterness in his voice revealed wounds far older than the current crisis. Cordelia waited, sensing he needed to articulate thoughts long suppressed. "I told him tonight," Bartholomew continued after a moment, "about the company's situation, the restructuring, everything." "How did he respond?" Cordelia asked gently. "Exactly as expected. Disappointed but not surprised. Apparently he's been anticipating my failure for years." The moonlight cast harsh shadows across his face as he added, "He's already contacting his connections to salvage what can be saved of the Winthrop reputation, as though that's what matters most right now." Cordelia considered her response carefully, aware of stepping into personal territory far beyond her official role. Perhaps for him, it is what matters most. We often cling tightest to what we've built our identity around. And what should matter most? Bartholomew challenged, turning to face her directly. "The twins," she answered without hesitation. "How they navigate this change, whether they learn that worth comes from character, not circumstances." Something shifted in Bartholomew's expression, a recognition, perhaps, of the essential truth in her words. "You've changed them. In just a few months you've helped them become more themselves somehow." "They were always themselves," Cordelia corrected gently. "They just needed permission to exist beyond expectations." The conversation paused as they both contemplated this simple yet profound observation. The night air carried the scent of roses and sea salt, an incongruously romantic backdrop for a discussion of financial ruin and family dynamics. "May I ask you something personal?" Bartholomew ventured after a moment. Cordelia nodded, though apprehension flickered through her. "Your son, you mentioned losing custody. Was that final?" The question pierced directly to the heart of her carefully guarded pain. In the strange liminal space of this moonlit garden, far from their normal contexts, Cordelia found herself answering with unprecedented honesty. "Legally, yes. I lost all parental rights when he was 5. The court determined that my circumstances, unstable housing, excessive work hours, inadequate childcare arrangements, constituted neglect. The clinical language did nothing to disguise the devastating reality. In simpler terms, I was too poor to keep my child." Bartholomew's shocked expression reflected the brutal injustice rarely acknowledged by those who had never experienced systemic disadvantage. "His father wasn't in the picture," Cordelia continued, the words flowing now that the dam had broken. "Evander was adopted by a couple with resources I could never provide. Private schools, music lessons, family vacations, college funds, all the things I wanted for him but couldn't offer. Do you know where he is now? Have you had any contact?" She shook her head. "Closed adoption. When he turns 18, he can decide whether to find me. Until then," her voice faltered briefly, "until then I try to make a life he wouldn't be ashamed of if we ever meet again." The vulnerability of this admission hung between them, altering the invisible landscape of their relationship. Bartholomew's response, when it finally came, surprised her. "Thank you," he said simply, "for trusting me with that." The absence of pity or platitudes in his acknowledgement allowed Cordelia to retain her dignity even in revelation. They resumed walking, circling back toward the house that represented everything she had lost, and he was about to lose. "It's strange," Bartholomew reflected as they approached the rear terrace. "All my life, I've feared failure, defined as anything less than my father's success. Now that it's happening, the actual failure feels less catastrophic than the anticipation." "Because you're discovering that you're more than your circumstances," Cordelia observed. "Just as you hope the twins will learn." He stopped at the terrace steps, turning to face her fully. In the moonlight, the usual barriers of employer and employee, privilege and service, seemed momentarily transparent, revealing simply two people facing different versions of the same human struggle for meaning beyond circumstance. "Cordelia," he began, then hesitated, searching for words. "Whatever changes come in the weeks ahead, I want you to know—" "Bartholomew?" Harrison's voice cut through the moment like a blade. He stood in the doorway, backlit by the interior lights, his expression unreadable. "A word, if you please, about the boys' educational arrangements moving forward." Reality reasserted itself instantly. Bartholomew straightened, professional mask sliding back into place. "Of course, Father." "Good night, Cordelia." As she watched him follow Harrison inside, Cordelia felt the brief connection recede, replaced by the complicated reality of their situation. A family in crisis, an uncertain future, and her own precarious position within both. In her room, later that night, unable to sleep despite physical exhaustion, she wrote in her journal, "This house breathes judgment, every portrait watching, every heirloom whispering of a past that defines the present. The twins feel it. They perform themselves rather than being themselves here, Even Bartholomew becomes someone else in his father's presence, more rigid, less authentic. Tomorrow we return to Boston and the reckoning that awaits. The mansion will be sold, lives upended. And yet beneath the loss lurks possibility, the chance to build something more genuine from the ruins of false security. I never imagined finding such complex connection in this job. Professional boundaries blur with every conversation, every shared concern for the boys, every moment of unexpected understanding. I must be careful. When their world changes, my role in it may become unnecessary. I cannot afford another heartbreak like Evander. Closing the journal, Cordelia moved to the window overlooking the moonlit ocean, constant, powerful, indifferent to human concerns of status and belonging. Somewhere beyond that vast darkness lay answers none of them could yet imagine, to questions they were only beginning to formulate. July descended upon Boston with oppressive heat that seemed to mirror the mounting pressure within the Winthrop household. News of the company's financial troubles had begun to circulate among industry insiders, though Bartholomew had managed to delay public disclosure while finalizing restructuring agreements. The mansion vibrated with unspoken tension, like a string pulled too tight and about to snap. Cordelia found Bartholomew in his study late one evening, surrounded by documents bearing ominous phrases like asset liquidation and creditor negotiations. His tie hung loosely around his neck, hair disheveled from repeated frustrated gestures. "The boys are asking if we're still going to Maine in August," she said softly, placing a cup of coffee beside him. "Their annual vacation at the lake house." Bartholomew didn't look up. "The lake house is being listed next week, along with the Cape property, the Manhattan apartment, and this mansion." The clinical detachment in his voice couldn't disguise the pain beneath. These weren't merely properties. They were repositories of family memories, tangible connections to a past now slipping away. "I see," Cordelia replied. "Should I tell them, or would you prefer—" "I'll tell them," he interrupted, finally meeting her gaze. "Tomorrow at breakfast. It's time they understood what's happening." He gestured toward the chair across from his desk. "Please sit. I'd value your perspective on how to approach this." Cordelia settled into the leather chair, struck by how this scene, their late-night consultations, her input sought and valued, had become almost routine in recent weeks. The traditional boundaries of their relationship had blurred into something neither could precisely define. "Honesty is essential," she began thoughtfully, "but framed in terms they can process. Focus on what remains constant, your love, your family connection, rather than what's changing." Bartholomew nodded, considering. "And how much detail about the financial situation?" "Enough to understand, but not enough to feel burdened. They don't need the numbers, just the impact on their daily lives." She hesitated before adding, "They're likely to be more resilient than you expect, especially if they see you managing your own emotions well." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Modeling healthy coping. Is that from your psychology books?" Cordelia returned the smile, recalling how he discovered her growing collection of child development texts borrowed from the public library. "Partly, it's also from experience. Children take their emotional cues from adults they trust. And they trust you implicitly," Bartholomew observed. "More than me in many ways." "Differently," she corrected gently. "They look to you for security, to me for understanding. Both are necessary." Their conversation continued, plotting a gentle approach to the difficult discussion ahead. When Cordelia finally rose to leave, Bartholomew asked the question that had been hovering unspoken between them. "What will you do when all this changes?" The question carried layers of meaning neither was prepared to fully explore. Cordelia's position would necessarily transform when the mansion was sold, the lifestyle downsized, the daily routines reconstructed. "I haven't thought that far ahead," she answered honestly. "My priority has been helping the boys through this transition." "They'll need you more than ever," he said, the statement somewhere between observation and request. "Then I'll be there," she replied simply, though both recognized the practical complications this commitment might entail. The conversation with the twins the following morning unfolded with unexpected grace. Seated at the kitchen island rather than the formal dining room, a deliberate choice to create intimacy, Bartholomew explained the situation with remarkable candor for a man who had spent a lifetime perfecting the art of projecting success. Dad's company is in trouble, he told them, maintaining eye contact despite obvious discomfort. We've lost a lot of money, which means we need to make some big changes. What kind of changes? Rupert asked, immediately practical. We'll need to sell this house and find somewhere smaller to live. You might change schools next year. We'll have fewer things. Bartholomew gestured vaguely around the kitchen with its professional-grade appliances and imported marble countertops. Phineas's brow furrowed in concentration. Is that why you've been working so much trying to fix it? The perceptiveness of the question caught Bartholomew off guard. Yes, he admitted, though I haven't been very successful. Are you going to jail? Rupert asked bluntly. Tyler Crawford's dad lost his company and went to jail. No, Bartholomew assured them quickly. Nothing illegal happened. It's just business problems that got too big to solve. The twins exchanged their telepathic glance, processing this information. Cordelia, observing from nearby, marveled at their capacity to absorb complex realities when presented honestly. Will we still be together? Phineas asked finally, the question revealing his deepest concern. Absolutely. Bartholomew reached across the counter to grasp his son's hand. We're a family. That doesn't change no matter where we live or what we have. What about Cordelia? Rupert turned toward her, anxiety evident in his expression. Is she still going to be with us? The question hung in the air, highlighting the precarious nature of employee relationships during financial upheaval. Before Cordelia could formulate an appropriate response, Bartholomew answered with surprising conviction. Cordelia is part of our family now. If she's willing to stay with us through these changes, she'll be with us as long as she wants to be. The declaration, though practically complicated, touched Cordelia deeply. The twins' visible relief confirmed how essential her presence had become to their sense of security. The weeks that followed brought rapid changes as the dismantling of the Winthrop Empire accelerated. The mansion was listed for sale, attracting immediate interest despite the cooling luxury market. Realtors and potential buyers began touring the property, their presence a constant reminder of impending displacement. Bartholomew secured a modest but comfortable townhouse in Cambridge, a significant downsize that would still allow the twins to finish the school year at Briarwood before transferring to public school. The kitchen table became command central for organizing possessions, determining what would transition to their new life and what would be sold along with the properties. Throughout this period, Cordelia maintained stability for the twins, creating routines amid chaos and preserving moments of normalcy amid upheaval. Day trips to museums, impromptu picnics in the public garden, weekly movie nights with homemade popcorn, simple pleasures that cost little but provided emotional anchoring. The most difficult moment came in early August, when the first estate sale signs appeared on the mansion's gates. The twins had been remarkably resilient until that concrete symbol of ending confronted them on returning from a baseball game at the park. They're selling grandmother's piano, Phineas whispered that night when Cordelia checked on them before bed. The one Mom used to play at Christmas. And all the stuff from Dad's study, Rupert added, his usual bravado absent. The globe where we mark places. We want to visit someday. Cordelia sat on the edge of Phineas's bed, her heart aching for their losses, not of material possessions, but of the memories and future dreams those objects represented. The piano and the globe are just things, she reminded them gently. The music and the dreams go with you. It doesn't feel that way, Phineas confessed, tears welling in his eyes. It feels like we're losing everything. Not everything, she assured him, smoothing his hair back from his forehead. Not each other. Later that night, finding sleep elusive, Cordelia wandered through the silent mansion. Moonlight filtered through tall windows, illuminating spaces soon to belong to strangers. In the formal living room, she paused before the grand piano, its polished surface reflecting fractured moonbeams. It was my mother's. Bartholomew's voice startled her from the doorway. Eleanor learned to play specifically to impress my parents during courtship. She was quite talented, actually. He moved into the room, trailing fingers lightly across the instrument's lid. The boys loved when she played. After she left, I couldn't bear to hear it. They mentioned it tonight, Cordelia said. The estate sale signs upset them. Bartholomew nodded, unsurprised. I found Rupert sitting in my study earlier, spinning the globe over and over. When I asked what he was doing, he said he was memorizing it. The image broke Cordelia's heart. Children attach meaning to objects in ways adults sometimes forget. I've been focused on the financial arrangements, the practical details, Bartholomew admitted, sinking onto the piano bench. I've overlooked the emotional impacts. You're doing your best, Cordelia assured him. They know that. In the moonlit room, surrounded by the trappings of a life about to be dismantled, they shared a moment of quiet understanding. Two adults trying to guide children through losses they themselves were still processing. Would you consider, Bartholomew began, then paused, recalibrating. The new townhouse has a small garden apartment on the lower level. It was intended as rental income, but I thought perhaps if you were amenable it might serve as your quarters. More privacy than your current situation, though admittedly less grand than all this. He gestured around the formal living room with its soaring ceilings and museum-quality artwork. The offer represented far more than practical living arrangements. It acknowledged the unique role Cordelia had assumed in their lives, neither traditional employee nor family member, but something essential that transcended conventional categories. "I'd like that," she replied simply, emotion making further elaboration impossible. 3 days later, disaster struck from an unexpected quarter. Cordelia was supervising the twins' packing of personal items when Bartholomew burst into their bedroom, face ashen. "Cordelia, a word, now." His tone brooked no delay. In the hallway, he thrust a tablet into her hands. The screen displayed a Boston Globe article with the headline, "Winthrop Family Nanny Revealed as Former Convict." Ice flooded Cordelia's veins as her eyes scanned the text, which detailed her past with brutal precision, the neglect charges, the terminated parental rights, the 6-month incarceration for child endangerment that had resulted from leaving Evander alone while working a night shift. Facts presented without context, judgment implicit in every line. "Is this true?" Bartholomew demanded, voice tight with controlled fury. "Yes," she whispered, heart pounding, "but not the way they're presenting it. You served time for child endangerment and didn't think to mention this when applying to care for my children." His incredulity was tinged with betrayal. "I was hired as a housekeeper," Cordelia reminded him, struggling to maintain composure. "Background checks for domestic staff don't require the same disclosures as childcare workers. When the arrangement with the boys developed, it happened gradually, without formal—" "Semantics," he cut her off. "You had a responsibility to inform me." "You're right," she acknowledged, the admission painful but necessary. "I should have told you when I offered to care for the twins. I was afraid—" "Who leaked this?" he interrupted, already moving toward damage control. "The timing is suspicious, just as we're finalizing the restructuring agreements." The article attributed the information to sources close to the family, suggesting insider knowledge rather than routine journalism. "Your father," Cordelia ventured, recalling Harrison's evident disapproval during the Cape Cod weekend. Bartholomew's expression hardened. "Possibly. He expressed concerns about your influence on the boys. This would be an efficient way to remove that influence while appearing to protect their interests." The clinical assessment of his own father's potential betrayal revealed the depth of complicated family dynamics Cordelia had only glimpsed previously. "Regardless of the source, this creates an untenable situation," Bartholomew continued. "The creditors' committee has made it clear that any further scandal could jeopardize the restructuring agreement. The boys' school will certainly raise concerns. The custody arrangement with Eleanor could be questioned." Each point struck like a physical blow, dismantling the precarious sense of belonging Cordelia had allowed herself to develop over recent months. "I understand," she said quietly. "I'll pack my things." "That's not—" Bartholomew began, then stopped, conflict evident in his expression. "This requires careful consideration. For now, perhaps it's best if you remain in your quarters, while I consult with the attorneys." The formal distance in his tone hurt more than outright dismissal would have. In the span of minutes, they had reverted from confidants sharing moonlit conversations to employer and problematic employee. "What about the twins?" Cordelia asked, her primary concern unchanged, despite personal devastation. "I'll speak with them," Bartholomew replied, already moving toward the stairs. "They should hear this from me, not discover it online." Left alone in the hallway, Cordelia leaned against the wall, legs suddenly unable to support her weight. The carefully constructed life she had built was collapsing like a house of cards, blown down by winds from a past she could neither escape nor fully atone for. In her small room, she sat motionless on the edge of her bed, numb with shock and grief. The article had not mentioned Evander by name, protecting his privacy as a minor, but had included enough details that anyone who knew him might make the connection. The thought of her son learning about her this way, through a scandal rather than the careful explanation she had composed in her mind 1,000 times, was almost unbearable. Hours passed in suspended animation. From beyond her door came the sounds of the twins' distress, raised voices, a door slamming. Bartholomew's measured tones attempting reason. Cordelia remained frozen, respecting the instruction to stay separate, while every instinct urged her to go to the children, to explain, to comfort. When night fell, she finally moved to her desk and opened her journal, seeking solace in the ritual of writing. But words failed her. How could she articulate this particular pain, the loss not of a job but of a place of belonging, not of income but of connection, not of position but of purpose? In place of coherent reflection, she found herself writing a letter she had composed in her heart years ago. My dearest Evander, if you are reading news about me, please know that every choice I made, even the terrible ones, came from desperate love for you. The complete story is more complex than headlines suggest. I was young, alone, working 3 jobs to keep us housed and fed. The night that changed everything, I had no childcare, no options, no safety net. I left you sleeping to work a 4-hour night shift, checking on you during my break. A neighbor saw me leave and called authorities. This explanation is not excuse. I failed you in that moment, failed to find another way, failed to be the mother you deserved. The consequences, losing you, serving time, were devastating but just. My punishment was never the incarceration, but the knowledge that I had risked your safety, however briefly, however desperately. Since then, I have tried to become someone worthy of knowing you again someday. I've worked honestly, lived simply, helped where I could. For a brief, beautiful time, I was permitted to care for 2 remarkable boys who healed parts of my heart I thought permanently broken. Whatever you may think of me, please know this. You were loved completely. Every day apart from you has been its own kind of prison. If we never meet again in this life, I will still count myself blessed for the 5 years I had as your mother. With eternal love, Mom. The letter complete, Cordelia placed it in an envelope she would never send, a ritual of connection to a child who existed now only in memory and hope. Then she began methodically packing her few possessions, preparing for the exile that seemed inevitable by morning. When dawn broke, she was ready, composed, resigned, determined to exit with dignity, rather than add to the chaos already engulfing the household. Whatever came next would be faced with the same quiet strength that had carried her through previous losses. This pain, however acute, was simply another chapter in a life defined by resilience rather than circumstance. The Boston Public Library embraced Cordelia with marble indifference, its grand reading room offering anonymous refuge among scholars and students. 3 weeks had passed since her abrupt departure from the Winthrop mansion, 3 weeks of temporary accommodations, unanswered questions, and a hollowness that seemed to expand daily. She turned the page of her book without absorbing a single word, mind drifting instead to the twins. Were they managing this latest upheaval? Had Bartholomew explained her absence in terms they could understand? The lack of information was its own form of torture, imagination filling gaps with worst-case scenarios. The official narrative had been clinical and brief. Given recent revelations about her background, Ms. Reynolds' continued employment posed potential complications for ongoing legal and financial negotiations. A severance package had been arranged, references for housekeeping positions provided. The matter was considered closed. Except nothing felt closed to Cordelia. The connection formed with Phineas and Rupert couldn't be severed by legal documents or practical arrangements. She worried about Phineas's reading progress, whether his dyslexia accommodations were being maintained. She wondered if Rupert's protective instincts had intensified, if he was trying to fill the emotional vacuum her departure had created. Most of all, she worried about their hearts, those resilient, wounded, magnificent hearts that had finally begun to trust after so much abandonment. Closing her book with a sigh, Cordelia gathered her belongings and headed toward the exit. September sunshine bathed Copley Square in golden light that belied her internal darkness. She had secured temporary work through a housekeeping agency, day jobs in various homes that paid the bills, but provided none of the connection or purpose she had found with the Winthrops. As she crossed the square, a familiar voice stopped her mid-stride. "Cordelia?" She turned to find Bartholomew approaching, impeccably dressed despite the reduced circumstances hinted at in recent business news. His expression was unreadable, part discomfort, part determination. "Mr. Winthrop," she acknowledged formally, heart racing despite her composed exterior. "This is unexpected." "Indeed." He glanced around the crowded square before continuing. "I've been trying to locate you. The contact information you left is no longer current." "I moved," she explained simply, offering no further details about the room she now rented in Dorchester, far from Beacon Hill's rarefied atmosphere. An awkward silence settled between them. Two people who had shared late-night confidences, now reduced to the stilted exchanges of distant acquaintances. "The boys ask about you," Bartholomew finally said. "Daily, in fact." The information pierced Cordelia's carefully maintained composure. "How are they?" "Struggling," he admitted with uncharacteristic directness. "Phineas's reading progress has stalled. Rupert's behavioral issues have resurfaced at school. The move to Cambridge was completed last week, which added another layer of adjustment. Each detail landed like a physical blow. Cordelia had known her absence would affect the twins, but hearing the specific impacts made the separation freshly painful. "I'm sorry to hear that," she managed, fighting to maintain professional distance when every instinct urged her to ask for their new address, to rush to the boys and resume the support they clearly needed. Bartholomew studied her face, seeming to search for something beyond her careful neutrality. "I owe you an apology, Cordelia. My reaction to the article was excessive." The acknowledgement surprised her. "You were protecting your family. I understand that." "Do you?" He shook his head slightly. "Because I'm not sure I do in retrospect. I allowed external pressure, from my father, from creditors, from antiquated social expectations, to override what I knew about your character, your commitment to the boys." Cordelia absorbed this unexpected admission, uncertain how to respond. "The article wasn't incorrect about my past." "No, but it was incomplete," Bartholomew countered. "After you left, I had my attorneys investigate more thoroughly. The context of your conviction, the circumstances that led to it, these paint a very different picture than the sensationalized version presented in the Globe." The thought of strangers examining the most painful chapter of her life made Cordelia's skin crawl, despite the apparently sympathetic conclusion. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked directly. Bartholomew hesitated, uncharacteristically uncertain. "Because I made a mistake. Because the boys need you. Because I—" He stopped, recalibrated. "Would you consider meeting with them? They've written you letters. Dozens, actually." The mention of letters, those precious written connections to absent loved ones, nearly undid Cordelia's careful composure. "I don't think that would be appropriate given the circumstances." "Circumstances change," he persisted. "The restructuring agreement has been finalized. The creditors' committee is satisfied. My father's influence has been minimized in our daily lives." Each statement represented significant shifts in the factors that had precipitated her departure. Still, Cordelia hesitated, protective instinct warring with longing to see the twins. "One meeting," Bartholomew pressed gently, "at a neutral location, the park where you used to take them, perhaps, just to provide some closure, if nothing else. Put that way, as a gift to the boys, rather than a reopening of wounds, Cordelia found herself unable to refuse. "When? Tomorrow afternoon? 3 o'clock after school?" She nodded agreement, already calculating how to rearrange her cleaning schedule to accommodate the meeting. "I'll be there." Relief softened Bartholomew's features. "Thank you. Truly." As they prepared to part ways, he added, "For what it's worth, Cordelia, not a day passes that I don't regret how things ended. The boys aren't the only ones who miss your presence in our lives." The admission hung between them, neither fully personal nor entirely professional, much like the relationship they had developed over months of shared concern for the twins. "Until tomorrow, then," Cordelia replied, unable to address the deeper implications of his statement. That night, in her small rented room that felt more like temporary shelter than home, Cordelia tried to prepare emotionally for the meeting ahead. Seeing the twins would be both joy and heartache, a reminder of connection found and lost, of a place of belonging briefly experienced before returning to her solitary existence. She considered what to tell them, how to explain her absence in terms that wouldn't burden them with adult complexities. Most of all, she worried about raising hopes for a reunion that practical reality made impossible. Bartholomew might have revised his opinion of her past, but the fundamental circumstances remained unchanged. Her background created complications for a family already navigating significant challenges. When sleep finally came, her dreams were filled with twin voices, calling her name across distances she couldn't cross, no matter how desperately she tried. The park appeared unchanged when Cordelia arrived the following afternoon. Children playing, dogs chasing balls, ordinary life continuing despite the seismic shifts in her personal landscape. She settled on a bench near the baseball diamond, where she had first witnessed the twins' transformation from rigid Winthrop heirs to simply boys enjoying unstructured play. At precisely 3 o'clock, a modest sedan pulled into the parking lot, a practical vehicle that represented Bartholomew's downsized lifestyle. The back doors flew open before the car had fully stopped, and twin figures burst forth, scanning the park with urgent intensity. When they spotted her, their synchronized shout of "Cordelia" carried across the green space with such pure joy that several nearby parents turned to witness the reunion. They raced toward her, all decorum forgotten, crashing into her with hugs that nearly toppled the bench. "You came! You really came!" Phineas exclaimed, face buried against her shoulder. "We wrote you so many letters," Rupert added, words tumbling out breathlessly. "Dad said you moved and he couldn't find you, and then he did but wasn't sure you'd want to see us, and—" "Of course I want to see you," Cordelia interrupted gently, holding them close while fighting back tears. "I've missed you both so much." They pulled back slightly, examining her face with the intense scrutiny only children can manage without self-consciousness. "You look different," Phineas observed. "Sadder." The simple assessment pierced straight to truth. "I've been sad," Cordelia acknowledged. "Leaving you was very difficult." "Then why did you go?" Rupert demanded, the hurt beneath his question palpable. Before Cordelia could formulate an appropriate response, Bartholomew approached, having parked the car and followed at a more measured pace. "Remember what we discussed," he reminded the twins gently. "Cordelia had complicated grown-up reasons for leaving that weren't about not wanting to be with you." The careful phrasing struck Cordelia as remarkably thoughtful, acknowledging the reality while protecting the boys from unnecessary details. "But she's back now, right?" Phineas looked between the adults with hopeful uncertainty. "She can come live with us in the new house." The question hung in the air, laden with implications neither adult had fully addressed. Cordelia met Bartholomew's gaze over the boys' heads, seeking guidance on how to proceed. "Why don't we all take a walk?" he suggested. "There's a lot to talk about." The twins reluctantly released their hold on Cordelia, but remained close as they moved toward the park's tree-lined paths, one on either side of her, like protective escorts. "We moved to Cambridge," Rupert informed her as they walked. "Our house is way smaller, but I have a bunk bed now. And we go to a tutor for my dyslexia twice a week," Phineas added. "But she's not as good as you. She doesn't let me use colored paper for homework." Each detail of their changed lives both comforted and pained Cordelia, evidence they were adjusting, yet reminders of her absence during this significant transition. As the twins raced ahead to examine a particularly impressive tree, perfect for climbing, Bartholomew seized the opportunity for private conversation. "They've been planning this meeting for days," he told her. "Deciding what to tell you first, what to show you in the park, how to convince you to return." Cordelia's heart contracted painfully. "I don't want to disappoint them, but I'm not sure—" "Hear me out," Bartholomew interrupted, uncharacteristically urgent. "These past weeks have clarified many things. The business restructuring, while painful, has been liberating in unexpected ways. Without the burden of the Winthrop legacy to maintain, I've had space to consider what truly matters." "The twins," Cordelia nodded, understanding. "Yes, and the kind of home they deserve, not one defined by wealth or status, but by security, understanding, connection." He hesitated before adding, "The kind of home you helped create, however briefly." The implication hung between them, too significant to be misunderstood, yet too delicate to be stated directly. "Are you offering me my position back?" Cordelia asked carefully. "Not exactly." Bartholomew's gaze remained fixed on the twins, who were now attempting to climb the massive oak under the watchful eye of a park attendant. "I'm offering you a partnership." "I don't understand." He turned to face her directly. "The garden apartment I mentioned before the interruption remains available. Your role would be officially as the twins' tutor, particularly for Phineas's dyslexia support. Unofficially, you would be what you've already become, an essential part of our family structure, however unconventional that might appear to others." The proposal represented a radical departure from traditional arrangements, neither standard employment nor conventional family membership, but something unique crafted to address their particular circumstances. "Your father would object," Cordelia observed, testing the boundaries of this proposed arrangement. "My father's financial support came with strings I'm no longer willing to accept," Bartholomew replied with newfound conviction. "His vision for the Winthrop legacy nearly destroyed my children's emotional well-being. I won't make that mistake again." The twins had abandoned the tree and were racing back toward them, faces flushed with exertion and joy, simply at being in Cordelia's presence again. Watching them approach, she felt the full weight of the decision before her. "I need time to consider," she said finally. "This affects all of us in ways that require careful thought." Bartholomew nodded acceptance. "Of course, but know this, whatever you decide, you will always have a place in our lives. The boys made me promise to tell you that." As the afternoon continued with ice cream and playground adventures, Cordelia observed the subtle changes in all three Winthrops. The twins seemed simultaneously more mature and more childlike, bearing the increased responsibility of their changed circumstances, yet more freely expressing joy and affection. Bartholomew had shed some of his rigid formality, laughing openly at the boys' antics, and participating in their games without concern for dignity. When the time came to part, the twins' distress was palpable, but different from their earlier abandonment fears. This separation came with promises of another meeting soon, with letters that would actually be delivered, with the possibility of reunion rather than permanent loss. As Cordelia watched them drive away, waving until the car disappeared from sight, she felt something shift within her, a crack in the protective walls she had rebuilt around her heart after leaving the Winthrop household. The possibility of belonging, of meaningful connection beyond conventional definitions of family, beckoned with both promise and peril. That night, in her sparse rented room, Cordelia opened her journal for the first time since the day of her departure. After weeks of silence, words finally flowed. Today I held them again, those remarkable boys who somehow found their way past every defense. Their joy at seeing me was both gift and burden. Do I dare risk loving them again, knowing the pain separation brings? Do I dare not to, knowing the emptiness of safety purchased at the cost of connection? Bartholomew offers something unprecedented, neither employment nor family in traditional terms, but a third path created specifically for our unique circumstances. The practical woman in me questions the sustainability of such an arrangement. The mother in me recognizes the healing it might bring to all involved. Perhaps there are no perfect solutions, only imperfect people doing their best to create something meaningful from the fragments of broken plans and shattered expectations. Perhaps family is not what we're born into, but what we build together intentionally day by day. Tomorrow I will visit the Cambridge townhouse. Not to decide, not yet, but to see this new beginning they've created, to determine if there might be space within it for my own new beginning as well. Closing the journal, Cordelia moved to the window and gazed at the night sky. The same stars visible from Beacon Hill and Cambridge, from wealth and modest means, from certainty and possibility. For the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to imagine a future defined not by past mistakes, but by present choices and the courage to risk connection despite its inevitable vulnerabilities. The Cambridge townhouse stood in stark contrast to the Beacon Hill mansion, modest red brick among similar structures, distinguished only by window boxes filled with late-blooming flowers and a freshly painted blue door. As Cordelia approached on foot, having taken the tea from her Dorchester apartment, she noted the neighborhood's academic atmosphere: bicycles locked to racks, coffee shops filled with students, bookstores nestled between local businesses. Bartholomew had texted the address with a simple message: "Any time after 3." The The boys will be home from school by then. No pressure, just a visit. She hesitated on the sidewalk, suddenly uncertain. The past week had been filled with careful consideration of his proposal, list-making, scenario imagining, weighing practical concerns against emotional needs. Yet standing here, reality seemed simultaneously more complex and simpler than any analysis could capture. Before she could reconsider, the blue door flew. The blue door flew open, and the twins burst onto the small front stoop, their exuberant welcome eliminating any possibility of retreat. "You came! You really came!" Phineas exclaimed, grabbing her hand and tugging her toward the entrance. "We've been watching out the window for hours." "Dad said not to get our hopes up," Rupert added, bouncing slightly with contained excitement. "But we knew you'd come, we just knew it." The townhouse interior revealed thoughtful adaptation to changed circumstances. The furniture was a mixture of pieces she recognized from the mansion, selected for practicality rather than prestige, and newer, more modest additions. Family photographs dominated walls previously reserved for ancestral portraits. Most striking was the sense of genuine habitation, a lived-in quality the mansion, for all its grandeur, had often lacked. "We want to show you everything," Phineas declared, already pulling her toward a staircase. "I have a reading corner with the special lamp you found that doesn't hurt my eyes." The twins' shared bedroom featured bunk beds, 2 desks positioned to maximize natural light, and walls decorated with their artwork, including several pieces from the gallery opening months earlier. Phineas proudly demonstrated his reading corner, with specialized lighting and color-coded bookshelves. "I practice every day," he told Cordelia earnestly, "even when it's hard. Like you taught me." Most surprising were the personal touches already in place in the garden apartment. Bookshelves filled with her child development texts, a reading chair positioned perfectly beside a lamp, walls painted in the soft blue she had once mentioned preferring. "We might have been presumptuous," Bartholomew acknowledged when he noted her surprised expression. "The boys were very specific about how they thought you might like things arranged." After the twins were finally persuaded to allow the adults some private conversation, Bartholomew revealed the information that would change everything. After the article appeared, "I had my attorneys conduct a thorough investigation," he explained. "Evander Rivers attends Westlake Academy in Brookline. He's a sophomore on academic scholarship. By all accounts, he's thriving. Excellent student, particularly in mathematics and music." His voice softened. "He has your eyes." The information, this precious glimpse of the child she had lost, overwhelmed Cordelia completely. For 9 years, she had respected the closed adoption's boundaries, never attempting to locate her son. "There's something else," he continued. "The school is less than 2 miles from here." The proximity, this cosmic coincidence or divine orchestration, stunned Cordelia into silence. For years she had imagined her son growing up in some distant place. To learn he had been so close, perhaps even passing her on street corners or in grocery stores, seemed both miraculous and cruel. 3 days later, she moved into the garden apartment with her few possessions and immeasurable hope. The transition wasn't presented as triumph or perfect resolution, but as beginning, tentative, thoughtful steps toward creating something unique and valuable, precisely because it defied conventional categories. October painted Cambridge in crimson and gold, transforming Harvard Yard into a canvas of autumn glory. 2 months into the new arrangement, the rhythms of life in the townhouse had developed comfortable familiarity. School days and work schedules, shared meals and private spaces, the delicate dance of boundaries continuously negotiated with goodwill on all sides. Cordelia had settled into her dual role with growing confidence. Mornings found her working with Phineas on his reading strategies. Afternoons included homework supervision for both boys, and evenings frequently featured family dinners where her place at the table had become unquestioned. On this particular Saturday morning, Cordelia supervised breakfast preparations, the twins having graduated from cereal consumers to enthusiastic, if messy, pancake makers, while Bartholomew reviewed weekend activity options. "The Science Museum has a new exhibit on marine ecosystems," he noted. "Or there's apple picking at that orchard we visited last fall." "Apple picking," the twins responded in unison, their telepathic communication requiring no discussion. At the orchard, which sprawled across rolling hills blazing with autumn color, The twins raced ahead in search of perfect specimens. Following their excited calls, Cordelia and Bartholomew reached a small clearing where both boys stood frozen, staring at something beyond their immediate view. In the clearing stood a teenage boy, tall and lanky, with honey-brown hair and familiar eyes Cordelia would have recognized in any crowd in any circumstance, across any distance. Evander. Time compressed and expanded simultaneously. Cordelia felt Bartholomew's steadying hand on her elbow as recognition and shock rendered her momentarily unstable. "Sorry about that." The teenager addressed the twins with casual friendliness. "Did I steal your record-breaking apple?" "That one?" Phineas pointed to a particularly impressive specimen. "Is it for a contest or something?" "Science project," Evander replied, his voice deeper than in Cordelia's memories, yet carrying echoes of the child she had known. "Comparing sugar content across different varieties. I'm hypothesizing that size correlates with sweetness, but I need to test it properly." As the boys engaged in this unexpected scientific discussion, Cordelia remained frozen, drinking in details of the son she had last seen as a 5-year-old. Now 14, he had her eyes, but his father's height, her expressive hands but different mannerisms, familiar features arranged in increasingly adult proportions. Bartholomew, sensing her emotional paralysis, smoothly entered the conversation. "That sounds like an impressive project. You must be quite advanced in your studies." "I'm in the accelerated science program at Westlake," Evander explained. "This is for the regional science fair next month." The conversation might have ended there, a brief intersection of lives soon to diverge again, had Phineas not noticed the book protruding from Evander's backpack. "Hey, that's the same book Cordelia uses to help me with my dyslexia," he exclaimed, pointing to a distinctive cover. "Are you dyslexic too?" "No, my mom is a special education consultant. She works with dyslexic students," Evander explained, pulling out the book. "I'm helping her test some new techniques for her research." The revelation that Evander's adoptive mother worked in educational support, perhaps even developing methods similar to those Cordelia had intuitively discovered for Phineas, created an unexpected connection that transcended biological ties. "That's what Cordelia does for me," Phineas explained, grabbing her hand and pulling her forward. "She makes reading not so hard." Forced into direct interaction, Cordelia managed a smile that concealed the emotional earthquake beneath. "I'm still learning the best approaches. That book has been very helpful." Evander studied her with polite interest that held no recognition. "My mum says different brains need different teaching methods, like there's no single way that works for everyone." "Your mum sounds very wise," Cordelia replied, the words nearly catching in her throat. After he departed, Cordelia stood motionless until Bartholomew gently touched her shoulder. "Are you all right?" he asked quietly. "I need a moment," she managed, voice barely functioning. Once the twins had darted away, Cordelia finally released the careful control she had maintained, tears flowing silently as she processed the extraordinary intersection of past and present. "He's wonderful," she whispered. "So intelligent, so confident." "Yes," Bartholomew agreed simply. "And he has your eyes, your exact eyes." "His adoptive mother works in special education," Cordelia noted, finding meaning in this coincidental alignment. "Helping dyslexic children, just like you," Bartholomew completed. "Perhaps there's more connection than separation, even across the legal boundaries." This perspective, framing the situation in terms of continuity rather than rupture, offered new possibilities for processing long-held grief. Perhaps Evander's life hadn't represented complete disconnection from hers, but rather extension, values and priorities flowing through different channels toward similar destinations. November arrived with characteristic New England assertiveness, bare trees, biting winds, and the promise of snow hovering on the horizon. Inside the Cambridge townhouse, preparations for Thanksgiving had sparked unexpected debates about tradition and innovation. "But we always have Thanksgiving at grandfather's," Rupert argued over Saturday breakfast, "with the fancy china and the long speeches about Winthrop history." "That tradition might need adjustment this year," Bartholomew explained carefully. "Grandfather and I have different ideas about family priorities right now." This diplomatic phrasing masked the reality of Harrison Winthrop's ultimatum. Bartholomew could return to the family fold for holidays only if he terminated the inappropriate domestic arrangement with the former housekeeper, and recommitted to upholding Winthrop's standards. You mean he's still mad about the company, Phineas observed with direct insight, and about Cordelia living here. Essentially, yes, Bartholomew acknowledged, which gives us the opportunity to create our own Thanksgiving tradition this year. The twins absorbed this information with thoughtful expressions, their initial resistance gradually shifting toward consideration of possibilities. Could we invite people we actually like? Rupert suggested, warming to the concept. Instead of those cousins who always brag about their skiing vacations. As plans expanded beyond the nuclear family to include a community gathering, Cordelia watched Bartholomew embrace the concept with genuine enthusiasm, another sign of his evolution from status-conscious patriarch to authentic parent. Mid-month, an unexpected letter arrived from Westlake Academy, addressed to Cordelia at the townhouse. The envelope sat unopened on her garden apartment table for hours, while she gathered courage to face its contents. Dear Ms. Reynolds, Westlake Academy is currently seeking a learning specialist to join our academic support department for the spring semester. Your name has been recommended by multiple sources as someone with innovative approaches to dyslexia intervention and exceptional ability to connect with students who have diverse learning needs. While we understand you may not possess conventional credentials, Westlake values demonstrated excellence and practical results above formal qualifications. Someone had recommended her, multiple someones apparently, for a position at the very school her son attended. When she showed the letter to Bartholomew, his expression confirmed her suspicion about its origin. You did this, she stated rather than asked. Not directly, he clarified. I mentioned your work with Phineas to Dr. Abernathy across the street, who happens to serve on Westlake's Board of Trustees. This creates complications, Cordelia observed. Evander is a student there. The adoption terms specify no direct contact. The school has over 600 students across 6 grades, Bartholomew countered gently. The likelihood of direct interaction would be minimal unless specifically arranged. Thanksgiving itself arrived with characteristic New England flourish, light snow dusting bare branches, temperatures requiring scarves and gloves. Inside the townhouse, warmth of multiple kinds transformed the modest space into something approaching magical. Extra tables borrowed from neighbors filled the living room, covered with mismatched tablecloths. The promised children's table occupied a sunny corner, decorated with handmade place cards. Kitchen counters overflowed with traditional dishes alongside contributions reflecting their guests' diverse backgrounds. Samosas from the Patel family, empanadas from the Rodriguez twins' grandmother, cranberry chutney from Professor Abernathy's family recipe collection. Most remarkable was the easy flow of conversation and laughter that filled the house. None of the strained politeness or status-conscious positioning that had characterized previous Winthrop gatherings. You should seriously consider that Westlake position, Professor Abernathy commented quietly to Cordelia. Margaret Thorne mentioned they've received quite impressive references regarding your work with dyslexic students. I'm still considering the implications, she replied diplomatically. My current arrangement with the twins is my priority. Westlake is quite flexible with scheduling, he assured her. No pressure, of course. But opportunities for formal recognition of natural talent don't arise every day. As winter progressed, Cordelia accepted the position with a Tuesday-Thursday schedule that would minimally impact her work with the twins. Her innovative approaches to dyslexia intervention quickly earned respect from colleagues and gratitude from students struggling with traditional educational methods. Most extraordinary was her meeting with Alexandra Rivers, Evander's adoptive mother, arranged by the academic director who thought they might benefit from comparing methodologies. When they were left alone, Alexandra spoke with careful directness. Evander mentioned meeting you at the apple orchard last fall, with twin boys and their father. The statement, simple yet loaded with significance, confirmed what Cordelia had suspected, that Alexandra knew exactly who she was. When you applied for this position, I requested to review your file, Alexandra continued. The name was familiar from documents we've had since the adoption. I want you to know, she added with gentle kindness, that we've always been honest with Evander about his adoption. He knows his biological mother loved him, but faced circumstances that made parenting impossible. As he's grown, we've shared age-appropriate details, including your name. The revelation that Evander knew of her existence that his understanding included recognition of love rather than abandonment, unleashed emotion Cordelia had carefully contained for years. "We've always believed that children benefit from knowing their complete stories," Alexandra explained. "When the time comes, and that decision remains entirely his, Evander knows he can ask questions about his early years, or even explore direct contact if desired." The gift contained in this statement, this open door to possible future connection without pressure or expectation, represented more than Cordelia had ever dared hope for during the long years of separation. Spring arrived in Cambridge with characteristic New England temperament, freezing mornings yielding to warm afternoons, early crocuses pushing through occasional snow. 6 months into Cordelia's dual role as the twins' caretaker and Westlake Academy learning specialist, a delicate balance had been established that served all involved. The garden apartment remained her private sanctuary, though its door stood open more often than closed, reflecting her integration into the household's natural flow. The twins entered freely during daylight hours, yet respected her need for personal space, a boundary established through conversation rather than rules. Bartholomew maintained appropriate professional distance while developing the easy companionship of co-parents, united in commitment to the boys' well-being. Most remarkable was the absence of defining terminology for their arrangement. They were neither traditional family nor merely household members sharing space. The practical reality of their connection had rendered labels unnecessary among themselves, though occasional social situations still required diplomatic navigation. "The twins asked me something interesting yesterday," Bartholomew said one evening as they sat in the small garden. "They wanted to know what to call our family, since we don't match any of the categories their friends understand." "What did you tell them?" Cordelia asked, curious about his navigation of this delicate territory. "That some relationships are too important to be limited by existing labels," he replied. "That what matters is commitment and care, not conventional categorization." The perspective reflected significant evolution from the man who had once prioritized tradition and appearance above authentic connection, who had valued Winthrop legacy over his children's emotional well-being. "Our arrangement, while functionally effective, exists in perpetual liminal space," he continued more seriously. "I wonder if perhaps more formal structure might provide security without sacrificing the unique qualities we've developed." "What kind of structure?" Cordelia asked carefully. "A formal employment contract, for one thing," he specified practically, "with clear terms regarding your position, compensation, living arrangements, and rights within the household. Legal protection beyond our current verbal agreements. Additionally," Bartholomew continued, "I've been exploring educational options that might interest you. Boston University offers a special education certification program with significant credit for demonstrated professional experience. This unexpected proposal, investment in her professional development beyond immediate household needs, represented significant departure from traditional employer-employee dynamics. And perhaps," he added more carefully, "because whatever develops between us in coming months or years, your independence and professional identity should remain secure and developing. Our personal connection, whatever form it takes, should enhance rather than define your path." This acknowledgement of potential romantic evolution without pressure or expectation, this prioritization of her autonomy regardless of relationship development, demonstrated profound growth from the controlling patriarch who had first hired her as invisible household staff. 1 year after Cordelia had first stood hesitantly before the blue door of the Cambridge townhouse, their unconventional family gathered for a celebration that defied simple categorization. The occasion was officially Cordelia's completion of her first semester in the BU certification program, but beneath this surface reason flowed deeper currents of acknowledging journey traveled together. Most meaningful was the small package presented after dinner, a leather-bound journal embossed with Cordelia's initials, accompanied by a card bearing messages from all 3 Winthrops. "For the next chapter," Bartholomew explained as she unwrapped this thoughtful gift, "whatever it may contain." That evening, after guests departed and the twins finally surrendered to sleep, Cordelia sat with the new journal open before her. Her pen moved across the first page, recording not conclusion but continuation. What defines family? Not blood alone, nor legal documentation, nor social convention. Rather, daily choice to remain present, to prioritize understanding over judgment, to create belonging through consistent care. The impossible has not been making this unconventional arrangement function, but believing it couldn't work, because it lacked precedent or permission. The tapestry we weave contains threads from separate lives, different traditions, various experiences, creating pattern more complex and beautiful than any single strand could produce alone. What began as temporary solution to immediate crisis has transformed into deliberate creation of something new, family defined by choice rather than circumstance, belonging established through commitment rather than convention. Tomorrow brings new challenges, adjustments, possibilities. The story continues beyond these pages, beyond this moment, beyond any conclusion I might attempt to craft. And in that continuing narrative lies the true miracle. Not endings tied in perfect bows, but beginnings constantly renewing through daily choice to remain, to build, to belong. Sometimes the impossible becomes possible precisely when expectations disappeared. Sometimes destiny arrived through disaster, belonging emerged from brokenness, and family formed in the undefined spaces between established categories. Not impossible after all, but destiny revealed one choice at a time.